Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the workshop portion of our meeting tonight. My board president's report is to introduce our attorney, Mr. Lester Taylor, who's got the lucky job of giving us our board training this evening. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, board members. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. In the interest of time, I am going to try to get through this presentation as efficiently as possible. I have previously submitted through Madam Superintendent and the Business Administrator a copy of the presentation, which you'll see up here on the screen for board members and the public to see. Pursuant to Title 18A, NJSA 18A:12-24.1, excuse me, that's the Code of Ethics for board members. You are required to annually review the Code of Ethics. There will be a form that you will sign at the end of this meeting, certifying that you reviewed the Code of Ethics and did this training, and that will be kept on file. Again, we're going to try to be as efficient as possible. You can follow along on the screen. You heard me just reference on slide 2, which is again the operative statute 18A:12-21. Generally speaking, the Code of Ethics, this is on page 3. I'm speaking to the cloud up here, who's the Vanna White that's moving the slides for me. Pursuant to the Code of Ethics, can you hear?
I just wanted to,
Okay.
No, we're good. Go ahead.
Again, it's intended to ensure that board members, as elected and in some districts appointed representatives of your local school districts, hold the respect and confidence of the people. And it generally governs conflicts of interest for school officials. School officials are generally your chief school administrator, your business administrator, your central office personnel. But it also, again, applies to board members, which is, again, at 18A:12-24.1. There are subsections A through J in that statute. And I'll also note that in your bylaws, you have a bylaw that essentially mirrors the Code of Ethics, which if you haven't read it, you should, because when you take that oath of office, you are basically swearing or affirming that you will be bound by all the policies that govern your school district. Those policies are about the size of 2 or 3 phone books. So you don't have to memorize them word for word, but you want to be generally familiar with them, particularly as they pertain to the various committees you serve on and the actions that come before you. General definitions on page 4, school officials, again, administrators, those are typically your high-level employees, board members, elected or appointed officials serving on the Board of Education, and again, your administrators, those who are holding positions such as central office, but also down into your buildings as principals, et cetera. They all have an obligation to comply with the Code of Ethics. Some of these things we're going to go through. We don't have time this evening. We don't have a full semester to go through all the different myriad issues, challenges, opportunities, threats that can present themselves. But we're going to try again to give a general 5,000-foot overview on some issues that come up pretty frequently. One of which are family members. There are provisions in the Code of Ethics as well as the accountability regulations that define family members. And because nothing is simple in New Jersey, you have different definitions in different sections of the statute and or the code. And so you have in Title 18A, a family member is generally a spouse, dependent child of a school official residing in the same household. And then you've got relatives, spouse, natural or adopted children, parents, and siblings, that school official. Pursuant to the administrative code, is a much more exhaustive definition of this is on page 5, a much more exhaustive definition of relative, which includes spouse, civil union partner, domestic partners, but then goes on almost like a bereavement clause. You were just talking about negotiations. So you probably see bereavement when someone has a death in the family, all the different categories that are covered by that. And that's in that bottom paragraph, siblings, aunts, uncles, step parents. And then it goes on to talk about others. And we'll talk about others in a little while, because even if you're not related by blood or marriage, if you have certain personal friend relationships, et cetera, that could very well be a conflict of interest from an ethical standpoint. So on page 6, again, the difference is that one definition is much more expansive than the other, as I referenced. The one in Title 18A on page 7 of the presentation deals with immediate family members as it pertains to the School Ethics Act, whereas the one in Title 6A, the Administrative Code, deals more so with your nepotism policies in your school district. And that's why I say it's important to be familiar with the policies in your district. Now that being said, because there's two different definitions, as you'll see on page 8, they don't always make a difference. Because the School Ethics Commission, which is the body that has jurisdiction over ethics complaints, has essentially commingled the two when dealing with complaints that come before it. So it really doesn't matter which one you're kind of accused of, they kind of all kind of fall into line or come into play when looking at different scenarios of ethics involving board members, immediate family members, and or others. Bottom line is that in reference on page 10, the SEC, School Ethics Commission, has explained that others, while not defined by the School Ethics Act, is any individual and can be an other, including people that fall within the definition of relative. Now, what I often say is that school district, you're more often than not the largest employer in town. Very few communities have large factories and things like that anymore. And because you are a local, most times lifelong residents and very active in your community, and some of you have children and grandchildren, and they actually have friends and all that kind of stuff, you know a lot of people in town. And so it's probably impossible to not vote on hiring a staff member, hiring a vendor in some respects that you don't know in some respect. And there's nothing illegal about that. There's nothing unethical about that. The challenge comes in is when you are ever in a position to give them some unwarranted advantage over some other qualified person that may or may not trigger the ethics issue. But if all things being equal, nothing says you can't vote for those individuals with the exception of family. And just generally speaking, the superintendent is precluded by the Code of Ethics from recommending you as a board to hire any relative of hers and or any relative of yours. The only difference is if that person was already employed prior to you getting the board, they are what's called grandfathered in. So they are protected in their current job, as well as any other advancement within the district the superintendent can recommend. Just jumping on to page 12 to give you some examples of others, and some of these I've dealt with in my 25 years practicing law, representing school districts. An ex-spouse. Sometimes you think you finally got rid of that person, and guess what? It still can create an ethical issue for you in your life as a board member. You're not that lucky, right? And so it really depends on whether there are any more ties or binds, namely financial. Is there child support? Is there alimony? Are there other financial entanglements, so to speak? The general thing being your spouse, your ex-spouse is employed in the school district, or your ex-spouse is applying for a job or something, or is a vendor. So the question will be, we're divorced, doesn't necessarily eliminate the conflicts. The question is, are there any other continuing obligations between the two in those areas? Cohabiting relationship. I had a board member, he was probably about 75 years old, very active gentleman, and his girlfriend worked in the school district. They lived together. The question was, well, we just live together. She's only my girlfriend. I'm like, you're too old to have a girlfriend. Like, let's grow up here, right? But the reality is, the question is, it depends on similar to the marriage situation of what financial entanglements there may be. And that situation extended also to that girlfriend's adult child who lived in the same house, but also worked in the school district, and whether there were any types of ethical issues. And the reality is probably because there was probably some incentive or motivation to vote for a higher percentage on the contract so that person could help pay the cable bill in the house. So you have to be mindful of those types of situations. One exception to relatives that a school district can kind of carve out are for substitutes and certain stipend positions. Depending, now it also gets into the weeds if the substitutes are full-time employees of the district versus contracted out through a third-party vendor. But one exception in the law, typically now, since there's a shortage of substitutes and stipend positions, not all stipend positions are filled by full-time employees in the district. You'll have community members, et cetera, who may apply for certain coaching positions or what have you. And so in those situations, there are exceptions under the law for those individuals to be involved. Board members, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to jump in. Jumping to page 27 of the presentation, this is an issue that often comes up, is money. In local elections, as a board member, while you were a candidate for the positions you now hold, it's a nonpartisan position, but there are certain fundraising efforts that board members can do and are allowed to do pursuant to the Election Law Enforcement Commission in the state of New Jersey. The general caveat or premise is that you can't, as a board member, as an elected official, solicit money in exchange for a vote. something in return, a quid pro quo. So that's the general defining line to be careful of. I will spare any references to any current events because there's a whole process for certain things you may have heard about at the highest levels of politics in our state. But it's important to recognize that as a board member, you can solicit contributions to campaign, but you got to be careful to make sure those solicitations are not in exchange for some wink and a nod agreement to do something in return. Similarly, as a subsection E of the Code of Ethics, as well as 18A 12-24, no elected member shall be prohibited from making an inquiry for information on behalf of a constituent if no fee, reward, or other thing of value is promised to, given to, or accepted by the member or a member of his or her immediate family, directly or indirectly. So again, you're at ShopRite, you're at my favorite store, Costco, or somewhere else, Starbucks, and someone asks you about something, and you're a board member. They think you're important. They think you have power. Your obligation as a board member pursuant to the Code of Ethics is to do one of two things: refer that query to your board president, who you elected to be your spokesperson, and then in turn, refer that to the chief school administrator, the superintendent. You can't make any promises or assurances to anyone because you have no power as one board member, but you can by all means get information and relay information, not make promises about what's going to happen, but study, investigate, and bring it to your administration to look into whether something can or can't happen through the appropriate channels, whether they be personnel, policy, or et cetera. One example, jumping to page 38, of things that often comes up in your role as a board member, gifts. I often say, before you were a board member, people probably didn't offer you much. Now that you're a board member, they may offer you certain things. Like let's say going to a conference to learn about all that's great in artificial intelligence for your school district, let's say, right? Sounds fantastic. And you might be retired and have some time on your hands and would love to be somewhere warmer than here. But guess what? If that is a current vendor or a prospective vendor, you can't accept an all expense paid trip to do a fact finding type of initiative. There's a case up in Patterson from 2020 on page 38 of the presentation where Mr. Capers, board member, essentially accepted a all expenses paid trip from a company called WazU that was selling some financial, strike that, a technological platform or something. It sounded good, but the problem was the School Ethics Commission found that there were 3 violations based upon this board member compromising the board, not confining his actions to the board versus individual, and recognizing that, again, the authority rests with the full board. And even though that vendor could have potentially done business, the process was now tainted and they couldn't do it. So you got to be careful of those types of things. Page 44. This is a situation where, as board members, many of you will do what? You'll call your business administrator, you'll call the superintendent, or you may call the lawyer to get an opinion. And in some respects, some people, not on this board, of course, but on other boards, people have a very convenient way of asking questions to get the answer they want, so to speak. And or sometimes unintentionally, they'll leave out certain key details. And in many respects, what we do as lawyers is very fact sensitive. The same question minus one word could be yes or no, depending on the time of day and who asks it, so to speak. But there is, in all seriousness, a defense, an advice of counsel defense that is set forth in another case that kind of came from Jersey City, 2023, where there are 4 prerequisite factors. So if you as a board member make a decision, take action, do or say something that was ultimately found to be wrong or inconsistent with the Code of Ethics, there's a very fact-sensitive 4-prong analysis the court will look at, which is whether the approval or advice was received prior to taking the action. So you can't kind of conveniently ask after the fact. Whether the individual who offered the advice or approval relied upon or possessed the authority or responsibility with regards to those ethical issues. Sometimes people will call the New Jersey School Board Association, great organization, but guess what? They're not your lawyer. You hire a lawyer that you really have an attorney-client relationship with. Number 3, the individual seeking the advice or approval made a full disclosure of all pertinent facts and circumstances. And that's up there with the selective kind of opinion shopping, so to speak. And number 4 is that the individual complied with the advice received including any restrictions that might be contained. Because sometimes, I'll say, yes, you can do that if, and the person just heard a yes. And so you have to be very careful to be mindful of following the advice as well as any potential restrictions that might be associated with that advice from whether it be your administration and or your attorney. Jumping to page 53.
Sorry.
Yes, let's go.
Can we just go back to that one for a moment? So I'm looking at the case in Jersey City. And if all four factors, so if a board member were to consult with you,
Can you
or
speak in the mic? Because I'm sure they can't hear you.
were to consult with you or Mr. Gross or our special ed attorney and ask for counsel or ask for guidance and met those four prerequisites and then use that as a defense, then the school ethics council would mitigate the penalty or?
Good question. So it may not, the presence of those four factors may not remove the violation or sustaining that a violation occurred, but it may very well mitigate the penalty. The School Ethics Commission is a board, is a body. They have the power to censure, reprimand is the most minor, censure, suspend, and or remove a board member. And so if action that arguably might warrant a suspension or removal, there's a mitigating factor that they in good faith relied upon the advice of a competent attorney, et cetera. And when you look at all the different facts and circumstances, like, wow, we can see how reasonable minds may differ. Well, rather than a suspension, it might be a censure or reprimand. So that could be what happens,
Thank
as
you.
long as those very four fact-sensitive areas are present. Email, reply all. Page 53 of the presentation. Board members, you will often get communications from your business office, from your superintendent, transmitting information about the upcoming agenda, the personnel, the finance, the football field, whatever the issue may be that needs to be discussed. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing illegal about that. You may get an email from your board president to all of you about something that's going to be on the agenda for tonight's meeting that we want to discuss or you want to discuss and have to deliberate on. Nothing illegal, nothing wrong with that. The challenge comes in when you hit reply all. If you hit reply all, you're now essentially conducting a meeting because there's now what's called two-way communication between board members and or administrators about board business. So you have to be very careful about hitting reply all, particularly if there are certain members of the public who might be on some of these emails, because now you might be compromising the board's position on something that was just an FYI, but your reply all might have some information that might be still of a deliberative nature. So please be very careful with replying all to emails and recognize that under the Open Public Records Act, every document, whether electronic or old-fashioned hard copy, is considered a government record. And so every text message, every tweet, everything you write privately, you think is private to your colleague or to someone else about this Board of Education is considered a public record, which may be subject to disclosure under OPRA, the Open Public Records Act. And so just be mindful of the records that are being created, the necessity for them and or the contents of them, because the question is, will it look good on the front page of a newspaper? So you got to think about that. Jumping to page 58, I'm being very mindful of my time, Madam President.
Thank you.
Board policy 0142, again, that's just your policy that generally mirrors the Code of Ethics. Jumping to page 62 of the presentation, we talked earlier about soliciting contributions and being mindful of certain gifts. There is an exception. Generally speaking, the New Jersey School Boards Conference, the workshop is held in October every year. You'll see vendors there with their goods and services. There's a lot of hospitality suites and different events for them. It is totally legal and ethical for you to be a guest and attend a dinner or a reception, et cetera. The general consensus or prohibition, though, is that it can't be just for you. It can't be just for this board. It has to be, quote, open to all, unquote. Doesn't mean it has to be 1,000 people there, but it can't be limited to just you. And so just keep that in mind, again, because there's a lot of situations where you want to get information, you want to develop relationships, you want to meet people so you can bring resources, information, and programs back to your district. And just want to make sure that you, as Vince Lombardi says, and what it takes to be number one, you know the rules, you play by the rules, and you win fair and square. So you got to just be mindful of that. For you football fans out there. All right. Jumping to 66. Page 66, 18A, again, 12-24.1. What does all this mean? As a board member, you must make decisions guided by state law and board policy, not bend the rules or ask others to bend the rules, not base decisions on special interests, agenda, or what is best for your own family, friends, etc., political groups, not become involved in the day-to-day administration of the school district. Again, you have a superintendent for that. You refer issues to her. It's her job to kind of run with it. You'll often hear the board member's job is like the what. What do we want? This administration's job is the how to follow through on that. And then how to do it in terms of managing expectations in a way that's fiscally responsible and feasible. Because if you want a big giant Ferris wheel, well, now you have to approve a budget that allows her to go out and buy one through the proper procurement methods. So a lot of processes to go into that. But if that's what you want, then by all means, establish it, and the administration has to run with it. But it also has to be at least tied to your curriculum in some way, shape, or form. So don't want the taxpayers to think we're buying Ferris wheels. Work together as a board. We often say we don't have to like each other, but we got to respect each other. So you want to work together collaboratively as a board for the smooth and efficient operation of your schools. Remember, again, that it's kind of like Voltron. Any cartoon fans, anybody have kids out there? Remember Voltron? Like you only have power when you come together at a duly called public meeting. And so you have to recognize that you have no individual power to do anything on behalf of this district. And in many respects, you're gonna get yourself in trouble and or compromise this district and make what might be very small situations a lot more expensive, a lot more time consuming. I remember Woody Woodpecker. It's always when he get in trouble, and they would say, if Woody had just gone to the police, this would never happen, right? And in many respects, if board members had just not said anything, because they have no obligation to say anything, and just bring it to the superintendent, bring it to the board, and then deal with it, a lot of things might not happen. Keep in mind, for all of you gamblers out there, your poker face, sometimes even by not saying something, it's written all over your face. And people run with that because, again, you have a lot of trust in you, respect in you. You're very influential in your community, and people will act and react based upon what you do, what you say, and what you don't do and say at certain times. Do not discuss executive session with anybody. That includes your husband, your wife, your friends. If they're not on this board, they're not in this building, with all due respect to your teachers, to your friends in the community, you are elected to represent them. You have a legal and ethical obligation to keep things confidential unless and until the need for confidentiality no longer exists. And it's very important, again, that ties into not undermining decisions of the board. This is a democratic process. Once a decision is made, run with it. Reality is you're going to be on a winning side and losing side of some votes, but undermining decisions can create challenges for your administration. It can create challenges for the vendors you do business with, the community you serve, because it shows a lack of stability. And it could be an ethical issue. So just try to keep that in mind. Page 67, a couple of Q&As here. Board member went into a middle school unannounced, took pictures of open windows in the classrooms, then spoke to reporters regarding his concerns and gave pictures to the reporters. Anybody think that's a violation of the Code of Ethics?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Answer is yes, because we're streaming through this. The answer is yes. Again, board members have an obligation to report issues. So if you get a report, the windows are broken, the heat doesn't work, the grass is not cut, it's not your job to go and do these investigations. It's your role to bring it to the attention of the board and or the administration. Now again, you can ask permission. And again, I say that I'm highlighting the word permission. Because you're the board and you hire the superintendent and she quote unquote works for the board. But technically you don't have the right to just go to a school without getting the permission and advance notice of the superintendent, who can quite frankly grant or deny that permission, depending on what else is going on that day or that week or that month, but also may want to create some type of organized tour with you, a visit with you, or quite frankly, just might want to fix it rather than wasting time waiting a week or two for everyone's schedules to align. So try to keep that in mind. Board president sent a letter to the editor, signed as board president, which was reviewed by the board attorney, but not reviewed and discussed with the other board members. You think that's right or wrong?
Not right.
Trick question, because it spoke to a lawyer, but didn't speak to you. Right.
Violation.
So board president speaks on behalf of the board, not him or herself. So what the board president says has to be consistent with what the will of the board is, the direction of the board, keeping in mind matters of confidentiality, et cetera. Next example, board member made a statement to the press during her reelection campaign that, quote, she would advocate a cooperative approach rather than a confrontational one regarding the board's request for an investigation regarding the feasibility of withdrawing from a regional school district. Do you think that's a violation? You got some election issues there. You got some board issues. What do you think? We're in public. No one wants to be, come on, all these educators here. Come on, Dr. Dalton.
It depends on the context, but you would hope that the board member states that this is their personal opinion, does not reflect upon the whole board.
Good. So there we go. That's the board member who went to his training. So.
By you.
So one, that was not a violation because it didn't compromise the board's interest. But number two, as reference, whenever you give a statement to the press, reporter asks you a question about something, if you feel compelled to answer without referring that question to your board president, which I would recommend you do. If you feel compelled to ask without referring it to your superintendent, which I would recommend you do, by all means, please take my advice and say that these are your personal opinions, not said on behalf of the Board of Education, the Ocean Township Board of Ed to be specific. If you put something on your Facebook page, whoever uses Facebook still, or you put it on your LinkedIn page, or you put it on your, you tweet something, you text something, you write a letter to the editor, it has to have that disclaimer. And be mindful that, and I'm handling a case now where a board member in North Jersey put the disclaimer, but the Deputy Attorney General who's handling the case on behalf of the School Ethics Commission said, yeah, but that was a wink and a nod. You kind of put it because you had to, but everything that was in it was almost like in contravention of that disclaimer. So even in doing that, you have to be careful and mindful of the words that you use, the tone that you use, and the context, time, and manner of the statements you use. Madam President, I'm almost done. I'm going to jump to a few more slides. I'm still within that 20 minutes you gave me. 0169, page 93 of the proposal package. You have a policy about use of technology, social networks, et cetera. Again, a little bit of common sense goes a long way. Particularly if and when communicating with employees of the district and or other than people other than board members or the administration. Just be mindful of the image that you are portraying. I often say you look at boards of privately held companies, Costco, Microsoft, et cetera. You don't kind of see them airing their dirty laundry in public. You want to be mindful of that as well with respect to the district that you represent. And then one of my favorite examples in this area on page 98 of the presentation package, there was a case, Camden Board of Education, district that I used to represent. This happened, back, had a very young board member. He was a proud agitator of every issue that you can imagine in the district. And they had some challenges academically, educationally, et cetera, in their district. This is December 2011 when the case was decided, a few years after the US government caught and killed Osama bin Laden. And this board member went to Facebook and said, now if we could only do something about our local terrorists that destroys dreams and burns futures. That's what this person, with a big old picture of their superintendent next to this quote, in a city that triggered a lot of activity on social media and real or perceived threats about whether they were going out and get this person, quite frankly. And that created probably one of the first examples of when the law of school ethics caught up with the ever-changing social media, which is now way past Facebook now, about what board members can and can't say. Long story short, that person was deemed to have violated the School Ethics Act, namely in that the board member, as a board member, you don't always have to agree with the superintendent or your administration, but you do have an oath and an ethical obligation to support them and protect them in a proper performance of their duties. Doesn't mean that you agree with what they're doing it or how they're doing it, but the proper performance is a key factor, and there's an evaluation method and process, and there's a personnel process, all of which is confidential in nature, that you have to address some of those issues when dealing with or making comments about your school district and or your administration. Madam President, I'm going to stop there so that we are officially, my clock shows 7:31, but we started about 7:10, I think it was.
It's okay, it's okay. Does the board have any questions? Board have any questions?
There's 2 board members online. I don't know if they.
Ms. Conway? Are there any board members that have any questions?
I do not see any, but let me just scan them one more time. No, nobody has any questions,
I have a
Madam.
question.
Ms. Talarico?
A question, but I'm not sure.
You're not coming across clear. You,
Can you hear me or you can't?
now we can. That's much better. Go ahead.
I think Grace Ann's, Ms. Talarico's microphone is going off and on. Let me try something.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems like her microphone is muted and that's why we can't hear her.
Okay, is there, I'm thinking, is there a way
Brian
that
has
she
his hand
can
up.
type the questions and maybe she can either email Mr. Taylor or email me and I can email Mr. Taylor?
I think she can, yes, she can certainly chat with the board now. Ms. Talarico? Can you speak now? I see you're not muted. Yes, she can certainly put that into the chat if she would like to go ahead.
Okay, why don't we take Mr. Schneider and then she can type her question in. That's okay.
Just buying you some time there, Grace Ann. Mr. Taylor, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I have a question. So the reply all is very clear. It's been somewhat drummed in our heads on every chance that we have some training and some ethics discussions. But I was curious, just from a curiosity perspective. So if you had 5 board members on an email, would that also trigger that ethic issue?
So yes, so the board is comprised of 9 members. In order for you to hold a meeting, in order to constitute a quorum, you have to have a majority of the full membership, which is 5. So any communication that is to or from a majority or more board members essentially constitutes what's called a quorum. And so you got to be careful with the reply all. But the law has also been interpreted to prevent people from intentionally circumventing the law by having small meetings or small email chains of 2 or 3 board members here, 2 or 3 board members there, and then you kind of all come back together and have one conversation. So you got to be careful of that as well, so as not to trigger. That's called rolling communication. You got to be careful of that because, again, keep in mind, the communications are also public records, which may be disclosed under Oprah. So even though no one can see your email, all you got to do is an Oprah request from January 1st through March 31st to and from board member A and board member C, D, and E, and it will likely come up. And even if you send emails from your personal email, your Gmail account, I would encourage you, and I presume we all have, do you have Ocean Township? If you have school district email accounts, I would encourage you and advise you to use that email account for all board business. It makes it easier so that when Oprah requests come in for the administration to be able to, quite frankly, access them and determine what needs to be disclosed. It makes it easier if you're not on the board 5 years from now and we have to go back and try to find that information. But also makes it easier for you because just because it may be on your personal cell phone or your personal email address, if it's about board business, the communication likely still may be determined to be a public record that has to be disclosed. And while no one's going to necessarily come in and look at all your searches, you don't want to open up all your searches. So just use your board accounts.
Thank you. I do have Ms. Talarico's question, and she wants to know if board members need to follow advisory opinions from the SEC, and can you share some guidance on this?
All right, so advisory opinions are just that, advisory. They're not binding as a matter of law. They are advisory. Now, with that being said, any person of the public can request an advisory opinion from the School Ethics Commission. And if it's an issue that kind of comes up frequently or that might be of general public concern, they may issue that advisory opinion. Keeping in mind that advisory opinions, as I mentioned earlier on, similar to the advice that you asked for me for advice, is very fact sensitive. So every advisory opinion may not be directly on point with the facts in your district on that given day or time. But that being said, if an advisory opinion says if there's tape on that carpet right there, you can't pass go. I'm pointing to the tape on the floor right here. And you do that, then it just means that if you're found to have not only committed a violation of the code of ethics, but ignored, quote unquote, this advisory opinion, and there's a presumption that you knew or should have known about, let's say, then the penalty may be worse. Keyword is may. So rather than, let's say, a reprimand, it might be a censure or vice versa. So I'm not trying to downplay or mitigate or encourage any board member to ignore an advisory opinion. But I'm also making it very clear that an advisory opinion does not have the same force and effect of a law that is enacted by the legislature, that is interpreted by the Supreme Court, Appellate Division, Superior Court, and or the Commissioner of Education.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So I just want to
Ms. McGuff.
clarify at the end of the day. Contacting school boards, getting advisory opinions, doing anything like that, we should consult any of the answers to anything with our board attorney and get the board attorney's advice. And that's really where we should stand, since they know the ins and outs of our district better than school boards or advisory, ethics commissions or whoever.
Yeah, so again, your school district, and there's a statute that requires you to be a member of the New Jersey School Board Association. And they're a fantastic organization with a wealth of knowledge and information. They have a service, they have a team of lawyers that work for the organization. They have an attorney of the day that a board member and administrator can call. I can call, bounce a question off of that person. 9.999% of the time, they're going to say, check with your board attorney. No matter what answer they give you to the question, check with your board attorney. But what's also interesting, I've had experiences, and I've spoken to Carl Tanksley, who's the general counsel over there, and others. Like, hey, Carl, why'd you tell my board member they can do X? He said, oh, well, they asked me, could they do it? And it's pretty standard. I'm like, well, did they tell you A, B, and the other D, E, and F part of the story? Oh, well, no. So then you have a board member come into a board meeting. I called school boards today. They said you can't do that. But you don't necessarily know if they gave them the full story. And it's important to recognize that from an ethical standpoint on my end, as your attorney, I have an attorney-client privilege relationship with you, my firm, as well as any other firm you contract with, where we're ethically bound. There's a level of confidentiality. So I would argue that, quite frankly, if a board member is seeking an opinion from a third-party professional, whether it be an accountant, a lawyer, an engineer that does not have a legally binding contract with you, they may be committing an ethics violation by disclosing confidential information in and of itself. So you gotta be careful of that when you're forum shopping and opinion shopping. So you might not always like the answer per se, but you kind of got to deal with the hand you're dealt with, the professionals that you hire.
Okay, thank you very much. We so much appreciate you being here, and I know it wasn't easy for you to be here tonight, but thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Okay, with that, we will move on to our superintendent's report.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, again, thank you, Mr. Taylor. So nice to see everybody here tonight, and a little extra red on a Tuesday. I usually wear my red, but I went with the white and blue tonight just to change it up, but it's nice to see everyone. My report tonight is short, but I do just want to say that the Youth Art Show debuted last week and it was tremendous. And it is up all month at the town library. You can see the artwork from students of ours from all grade levels. And I'd just like to thank the teachers who put in countless hours to make that art display as tremendous as it was. And so I highly encourage you board members and public to take some time to go see that art show over at the library. Also, we had the intermediate school had their play Mean Girls Junior, which was fantastic. And the room was lit up in lights like a starry sky. And it was really something to see. A great performance by those students. I commend them and their advisors on a show. A great performance. And this week we have the high school performance coming up on its heels. Mean Girls, they had student performances yesterday in school, and the show kicks off this weekend, Thursday, Friday at 7 p.m. and Saturday at 2 p.m. Also, last Friday night, we had the Hall of Fame induction, the Alumni Hall of Fame and the Athletic Hall of Fame. I just would like to thank all of the committees, both committees, and all of the people that devoted time to putting that event together, particularly Mr. Todd and his office staff, who really did a great deal of the work to put that event together. Was one of the most inspirational nights we've had, I think, in a very long time, to see the athletic success of our students and the credit that they give to the coaches and the parents and the players, their friends, their colleagues on the field who helped make them the athletes that they are. They don't often talk about the goal or the points, but they talk about the experience and they talk about the bonding and the growing that they did as athletes on our fields. It was tremendous to see. And then the alumni. If I could just take a moment to say that this school district has borne such tremendous talent, it blows me away when I hear of these success stories. Just to give you a small snippet, we had 2 members of the class of 1969 inducted into the Hall of Fame on Friday night. One, Dr. Ira Byock, who is a leader in palliative care and an author of the book Dying Well. He is the point person on this in the fields of medicine. And he's tremendous accomplishments. And also his classmate, Chris Malachowski, was there as well. And he's the co-founder of NVIDIA, a tech platform that more or less helped AI become a reality. And also doing quite well in the stocks the last few years, if you want to pay attention to that. And to introduce them, and in awe of them, was their classmate, who happens to be the executive producer of all of the Batman movies since Jack Nicholson's version. And he was there in awe of their accomplishments. So, and also in that class, in our first round of alumni inductions, was Radia Perlman, who is a graduate of the class of 1969, who wrote the code that let the internet be built. I'm blown away. I'm blown away by what this school district produces and how every single inductee credits real concrete examples of turning points in their lives at our high school with our teachers who set them on their path. And it is just tremendous to hear and made me so very proud to be among the teachers that make this happen every single day. And I just felt I had to mention the night. It was tremendous.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay, so, and also just coming up the rest of the month, we have the Wanamassa School Glow Dance is on March 15th. The TOIS student and staff basketball game is on the 20th. The district-wide innovation night is on the 21st. OTES Follies on the 22nd, and the 14th, which is 2 nights from now, the most one coming up the soonest, is the Multilingual Learner Family Fun Night, district-wide event for all of our families, but the event is taking place at Wanamassa School. So we encourage our families to come out for that great event as well. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. And I echo your sentiments with the Hall of Fame and the alumni. It was an incredible night. It was a room full of pride. And each and every Hall of Famer that spoke up there, it all boiled down to the teachers. And they spoke about their teachers like, you know, they're their best friends and they talk to them all the time, but they've always remained in the backs of their minds throughout their whole career. So it was fascinating. Anyway, thank you for your report, and we will go on to School Business Administrator's report. Mr. Hastings.
Thank you, Madam President. I just have one reminder for the board, piggybacking off of Mr. Taylor's presentation. The ethics presentation is an annual requirement of the board. It's something that we're CUSAC on. I've left a copy of the code of ethics for each board member, and a signature on the back is required so that we can track and show that you've all taken these, taken Mr. Taylor's review of the code of ethics. And if at the end of the meeting or shortly thereafter, just provide those back to us, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will move on to public comment regarding agenda items. All motions are posted on the district website. At this point in the meeting, we will now conduct the first of 2 public comment sessions. The first session will be open for public comments on agenda items only, and the second session will be at the end of the meeting and can be on any topic. Would anyone in the room like to comment on any agenda items at this time? No? Okay, Mrs. Conway, is there anyone in the queue?
Yes, there is. There's a Mr. Jonathan Shutman. Please go ahead.
Yeah, do you want me to talk?
Yes, please, if you would like to make your
I
comment.
saw that one of the agenda items was in terms of job opportunities and applications. So I had a question for the board and superintendent regarding all job opportunities. How do you, as an administration or board, vet for favoritism and seek merit in recruitment and hiring decisions? Related to this, given appropriate credentials and/or experience required for, I'll look at the rest of my comment. Required for the position, what steps are taken to be inclusive and diverse and recruit a diverse workforce? This would include individuals with disabilities, not limited to physical, such as ambulatory sight or hearing impaired, but individuals with autism or learning disabilities with proper ADA accommodations or qualified, credentialed, and capable of doing the work. You also have a copy of this. I sent it as a chat message.
Mr. Shumban, we no longer answer questions at the meetings, but if you wouldn't mind emailing our superintendent with the questions, it was a little difficult to hear you as well. We would greatly appreciate that.
Can I have a comment, Ms. Parlamas?
I'm sorry?
May I make a comment?
Yes, absolutely.
I already sent the question in the chat.
Okay,
Can I
great.
send it again?
Did you receive? Okay,
It's in the chat.
in a chat.
In the chat.
Okay, if you could send it to Ms. Weldon's email, that would be great.
Okay, my comment was also relevant to the ethics conversation and the agenda item on job opportunities.
Yes, thank you very much again. We just no longer answer questions at the board meetings. Thank you for your comment. Ms. Conway, is there anyone else?
Yes, our next commenter, Madam President, is Alex Hayes.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for unmuting me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Alex Hayes from Oakhurst. Sorry I wasn't able to make the Alumni Awards ceremony. It seemed amazing being married to alumni. I'm constantly impressed with some of the folks that have done amazing and noteworthy things in this town, and hearing the superintendent tonight speak about all those incredible accomplishments of PHS grads. I think y'all need to post about that more. You need to publicize it more. I saw the NVIDIA post, but it would be really fantastic for members of the community to see some of those profiles, Ms. Weldon, that you just talked about, because I didn't even know of the Batman connection, or I think that guy actually spoke last year or something. But if we could put more profiles like that on our social media, I think it'll get good leverage and will show more people in town the potential of our grads. Congratulations and best of luck to those at the middle school right now competing in the 8th grade dialogue. It's rather unfortunate, though, that that was set over 6 months ago and this school board meeting is on the same night. So unfortunately, you school board members can't see the 8th grade dialogue. I thought the ethics presentation was very thorough, and thank you to Mr. Taylor. I've never heard him speak so quickly, so I do appreciate the thoroughness. There's definitely some things that happened in the past 3 years, that Mr. Taylor read about tonight, of things that, should not happen, but of course they did, or vice versa. So it was all fascinating. Just to reiterate, I'd like to thank the attorney for commenting on the advisory opinions. And I just would like to mention to the current school board members that when I provided public comment to the SEC in the fall, and I mentioned how in November, I made a motion while a school board member to follow all SEC advisory opinions that specifically dealt, with Ocean Township. And that was shot down, meaning the board effectively endorsed not following advisory opinions. The SEC chairman said, and I quote, "School boards who do that do so at their own peril." So I hope the school board and each member takes that into consideration. Loved hearing the thoroughness of what he had to say. And I have 2 questions, though. Sorry, I was reading some of my questions here. Of course, it's fitting that some people get up and walk away. The suspension on the agenda, just wondering what union, I know you're not going to answer this, but what union, or if none, does the employee belong to, and wondering if there were any registered union grievances over that suspension. And you're approving two students going to out of district private schools tonight. And then I think they're canceling two others, but the initial outplacements happened months ago, like 3 and 6 months ago. So I find it curious that you're only approving it tonight. It seems like quite a delay. So I hadn't seen that before ever. So I was wondering what that delay was. That's it for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. And you know to email Ms. Weldon, please, on your questions.
I already did. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, Ms. Conway?
No, Madam President, there are no further commenters.
Okay, being none, we will now move on to our action items. Mr. McCarthy. Yes.
Move to approve items 7.1 through 7.3.
Second.
Comments or questions? This is item 7.1 through 7.3. Mr. Dalton?
Yes.
Mrs. Dam?
Yes.
Mrs. Gilman? Mr. McCarthy?
Yes.
Mrs. McGovern?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes.
Mrs. Talarico?
Yes.
Mr. Weinstein? Mrs. Parliamus?
Yes.
And Mrs. Gilman, we're approving minutes. Do you?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Personnel, Ms. McGovern.
I move to approve items 8.1 and to 8.9 as discussed upstairs in executive session. May I have a second?
Second.
So all items 8.1 through 8.9. Any comments or questions? Mr. Dalton?
Yes.
Mrs. Dam?
Yes.
Mrs. Gilman?
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy?
Yes.
Mrs. McGovern?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Can I recuse myself since I was not part of the executive session?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Mrs. Talarico?
Recuse as well.
And Mrs. Parliamus?
Yes. Okay, with
All
that,
items carry.
thank you. We will move on to financial management. I'm going to ask Mr. McCarthy to take that, being that Mr. Weinstein is not here this evening.
I move to approve items 9.1 through 9.6. I'd like to present items 9.7 through 9.11 for discussion.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for 9.1 through 9.6? Anything, Ms. Weldon or Mr. Hastings that you'd like to talk about?
Sure. Ms. Conway, if we could bring up the presentation on the adoption of the tentative budget. Thank you. And the next slide, please. So I just again like to review the process. I know I've talked to the board about this a couple times already, and sorry for being repetitive. But the process involved in approving the budget for 2025 school year. Tonight, the board will be adopting or will be asking the board to adopt the tentative budget. Once the board adopts the tentative budget, which is required to be done by the 20th of March, the budget is then submitted to the County Department of Education for review. The county will review that and get back to us with questions and or comments on it. May ask us to make some adjustments based on their review. And then the board will formally adopt the final budget in approximately a 2-week window at the end of April, beginning of May. And we have a board meeting scheduled for April 30th, at which time we will do a public presentation and adopt the final budget. Again, I'd like to just touch on our aid. We did receive our aid numbers recently. As you can see, over the past several years, the district has lost aid based on the S2 formula and the clawback of the state of aids to districts that they feel may be overfunded. That aid is clawed back and then redistributed throughout the state to districts that they feel are underfunded. Our budget for 2025 and our state aid for 2025 has basically been flat. You can see the only adjustment to our aid was a slight increase in our categorical special education aid. But again, over the past 6 years, the district has lost approximately $2.5 million. Next slide, please. Question often comes as to where the funding goes. Where does our money go? How do we spend our money? Typically across the state, 2/3 to 3/4 of the budget for school districts is spent on salaries and benefits, and that's no different here. We have approximately 6% of our budget going on out of district tuition. Folks often ask about utilities, but that's a relatively small portion of our budget, which then leaves approximately 16% of the remaining funds in the other category, which we could break out into instructional supplies and programs, maintenance, custodial, transportation, technology infrastructure, those sorts of things. So again, you can see that a significant portion of the budget, again, as is with most districts, is salary and benefits. And unfortunately, with what's going on in healthcare and the benefits world, we've seen over the past several years significant increases in the cost of healthcare to districts across the state. Next slide, please. With the budget that's being proposed, we put together a slide with the estimated impact of that increase on taxes. This represents just the school district portion of the municipal tax. We've shown the impact based on a $500,000 home up through $1 million home. The average assessment is $847,616. That's up from last year, which was $772,466. That's just under a 10% increase in the average assessment. The total assessment across the township has increased 12%. So you can see for the average assessed home, year over year, we're looking at an annual increase of approximately $161, or about $13.50 per month. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions the board may have.
Board have any questions? Mr. Schneider or Ms. Talarico? Okay. Are there any other questions? 9.1 through 9.6. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, just to, recap after last week's meeting and our discussion around the budget, Mr. Hastings and I collaborated on the guidance we believe that we were receiving from the board. And this proposed preliminary budget demonstrates a 2.86 increase to the tax levy. That would be us taking advantage of our healthcare waiver. And we think that that is the best way to go with maintaining as many programs as we can and requests from our staff, but providing a reasonable increase to the taxpayer and not going above that 3%, which was discussed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
I would just like to make a comment, if possible. I think that we're in a tenuous situation with this budget. And I think that we are put in a position where there are two parties in this town that we are not going to be able to please either of. And I personally have struggled with this too. On the backs of the Hall of Fame event that we had last week, you could not leave that room without thinking immediately that our teachers are the competitive advantage in our town. They are, without doubt. And we're in a position now where we have to start looking at this budget every year and questioning what we're going to do and make a difficult decision. I would argue that adopting a 2.86% budget in a year like this, when we've seen massive increases in inflation, increases in the consumer price index that exceed this number, I would argue that we are actually adopting less than what would be a flat budget. I would make that argument legitimately in an open forum with people who understand finance even better than I do. And I think it's a really difficult thing. And I think that a lot of this, and this is why I'm standing on this soapbox, and I apologize, but a lot of this has to do with the S2 funding formula that we have. And what aggravates me is the last time I looked at this budget, We sent a letter home to our parents and we said to them that they needed to do something about this. They needed to call their representation in Trenton to re-examine that formula. And I have to give it to Senator Gopal. He did put a bill through to try to examine that formula, but it was shot down on the assembly floor and nothing came of it, right? We're here again this year in the S2 funding formula, nothing is being done about it. And I understand that a lot of people think that nobody has seen that formula, but one of our board presidents did. Jeff Weinstein, when he was the president, did see that formula and he questioned the Department of Education on certain things with that formula that did not benefit this district. We're going to be here again next year. We really are. And it's not an easy position to be in. And so I bring this all up to say that I think more members of our TOEA, of our town, of every part of this place where the Big Red is such a big thing, need to understand that the man who created the Big Red, who got inducted into the Hall of Fame, was a teacher. George Conti was a teacher in this district who created this beautiful thing that we have and this culture that we have. And he was somebody who was a competitive advantage for this district and made us who we are. And we are going to be stuck back in this position next year if we don't start to lean on our representation in Trenton, who this district showed up 71% to vote for this year. So I intend on Monday, believe it is Monday, to bring this up when we meet with our representation to try to get them to work with us to start to understand that they need to prioritize this S2 funding formula. But I am pleading with the town and the other people who support this to also reach out to them and ask them to do that. And I'm sorry for the long diatribe, but I think it needs to be said because we were here last year. We're going to be back here again next year. It's not an easy position to be in.
Okay, thank you. Okay, why don't we move 9.1 through 9.6?
Wait, Brian, I think.
Oh, Brian has,
Sorry.
okay.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to echo what John said. John, you hit all the points I was, looking to make myself. But when it comes to the election that just happened in November, to your point, Big Red showed up big time for those Senate and Assembly officials. So we're hoping that they could come up big for us when the time comes for both funding and then finding extra money for grants to help service some of the needs that we have in our community.
Thank you. Ms. Gilman?
And to follow up, in speaking with some of the New Jersey school board members at the 8th grade dialogue, they're very hopeful that the new school commissioner will be more forthcoming about the S2 formula. So it's on everyone's mind. And yeah, I think we should keep the pressure on.
Thank you. Okay, maybe we should move 9.1 through 9.6 before we go into discussion.
We do have a motion in a second.
Oh, we do? Okay, then you can read,
Roll call?
read the roll call.
Thank you, Madam President. This is for item 9.1 through 9.6. Mr. Dalton?
Yes.
Mrs. Dam?
Yes.
Mrs. Gilman?
Yes,
Mr. McCarthy?
Yes.
Mrs. McGovern?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes.
Mrs. Talarico?
Yeah.
And Mrs. Parlamas?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. Okay, discussion items 9.7 through 9.11. I'm going to defer to you, Mr. Hastings. If there's anything you want to talk about or mention?
Yes, I would just note that we have two grant opportunities that are on this agenda, 9.6 and 9.11. I would also note that we're accepting the stabilization aid, which is not what we asked for, but we'll move forward with that amount of funding. And be happy to take questions.
Ms. Gilman?
not questions, but rather a comment, and very hopeful that we get the Invent to Prevent grant, because anything that will build confidence in girls so that they feel brave and empowered just sounds like a program that would be beneficial to all, especially our 3rd and 4th grade elementary girls. So I hope that is successful.
Thank you. Anyone else?
What was last year's stabilization aid? Wasn't it $1 million?
Yes.
Was it $1
Yes, so
million?
The board approved an application for, I believe, just over 2 million, or maybe just under 2 million, received about $1 million. This year we applied for just over 2 million and received just under $17,000. In querying why or how this came to be, several things came to the fore. One is that the governor has been regularly putting aside a pot of money out of the budget to fund stabilization aid. And forgive me, my numbers aren't exact, but this year, I believe they put aside about $20 to $25 million for that pot of money, and they received requests to the tune of $60 million. So this is the third year now. So as districts have become more aware of this and more aware of the process, they're taking advantage of it. And then in asking how they came to our number, the comment was that upon reviewing requests, they looked at the aid that was lost in the 2024 school year and gave a percentage of that loss to districts. So we lost approximately $60,000 last year, and hence the award about $17,000, which is less than any of the requests that we put in for.
Do we know how it compares? I understand that 60 million is the big number, but I mean, do we know how it compares to the other districts who received aid?
Only anecdotally, that some districts that you would maybe be surprised that they received some aid or more aid, and other districts that were in the same boat as us in terms of being disappointed with their requests versus their reward or award.
Ms. McGovern.
I remember comments about stabilization aid. I don't know if it was last year or the year before. To your point about how much they got, how much money was requested this year, was that in a couple of years past, we've always taken advantage of we had put it in, we were said no for a long time, then it was like, you guys really should put in for this. So I think that there weren't a lot of districts, because they were being told no, say 10 years ago, right? Put in for it for a long time, that in the last 2 or 3 years, more and more people have put in. And then I think people were seeing probably numbers like what we were getting. And then it was like, oh, wait, we really should put in for this. So I don't know, there could be that too, that just so many more, as you're saying, 60 million. I'm sure it would be very interesting. And I don't need to know the number because, but I'm sure that the amount of school districts that put in over the last 5 years is very drastically different than what put in this year.
Monday.
Another one.
All right, anyone else? Sam?
Just so I'm understanding, so they said in their comment that they only looked at 2024's aid, right?
Yes, they're looking at year by year.
Only 2024. And how many years have we been doing the stabilization aid or requesting for it?
I'm not familiar with what the district has done over time. I believe this is the governor's third set aside for stabilization aid.
Okay, I find
It's
it,
a year over year application.
looking at all the money that we've lost, right, has been $2 million, but they're only looking at 2024 seems like something we should talk about and discuss, because that doesn't seem like it's balancing out to me. So if we could add that to the list for Monday. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Mr. McCarthy.
Okay,
Schneider has his hand up.
any other discussion?
Mr. Schneider.
Mr. Schneider?
Just, I'm sitting here in a hotel room by myself, so it's attempt at a bad joke, but have we considered maybe changing our town name to Newark by the Sea? We might have an opportunity to get $1 billion.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, with that, we will move on to instruction, education, and student activities. Ms. Gilman.
Thank you, Madam President. Move to approve 10.1, 10.2, and 10.3 is for discussion of our school field trips.
We need a second.
Second.
I guess
Which
Ms.
one?
McGovern, we'll give it to
I
Ms.
think
McGovern this time. Sorry.
Any questions or comments on curriculum writing or PD for staff?
Anything you want to add, Ms.
No, just
McGovern?
that it's that time of the year again where we start to look at rewriting our curriculum. So this is the first thing that comes before the board. It's the request for the hours, and then we'll post positions next after this.
Any questions? Okay,
And-
Mr.
Did I understand we're approving 10.1 and 10.2 and discussing 10.3?
10.3, I'm sorry, is up for,
Oh, it's.
Well,
it says discussion, but we usually vote on the
Yeah.
school trips.
I'm not sure why. Mine doesn't say
So we'll do
Action.
10.1 through 10.3 as an approval.
Yes, it is nice to see so many trips.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? So this is approval of 10.1 through 10.3. Mr. Dalton,
Yes.
Mrs. Dam,
Yes.
Mrs. Gilman,
Yes,
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mrs. McGovern,
Yes.
Mr. Schneider,
Yes.
Ms. Talarico,
Yes.
and Mrs. Parlonis.
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you, Mrs. Gilman, and we will move on to policy. Mrs. Gilman.
thank you very much, Madam President. So the New Jersey State Board of Education has made some changes managing for equity in education in their policy and regulation. They've retitled the Act NJAC 6A:7, which provides rules governing equity to each student and equal access to all programs and services. Strauss Esme has removed a list of all protected categories throughout the policies and regulations that you had your first read of. And they've replaced it with the words, the protected categories listed in NJAC 6A:7-1. This avoids repeating the complete list of all protected categories in the policies or regulations. Now, many of the policies you see are mandated with the M, and some have been revised. Some are recommended for us. For example, policy 5842 has been revised, and on advice to discuss with our board attorney how best to address the issue of equal access to all student organizations. Policy 2431 and regulation 2431, the treatment of concussions, of course, that's been mandated. And the example of protected categories used to read for every one of these policies: race, color, creed, sex, national origin, marital status, political or religious beliefs, family, social or cultural background, or sexual orientation. So now it will read any of the protected categories listed at NJAC 6A:7-1, 1.1A. So this is our first reading, and at your leisure to look through them. If you have any questions or comments, you can forward them to me or any of our policy committee members, and they will be up for a second reading.
Wonderful. Does anyone have any questions?
I just thought of one. and
Mr.
Thank you,
Dalton?
Mrs. Welding, yesterday for taking my phone call.
Mm-hmm.
Just on the concussion protocols, I'm not asking for an answer now, but just wondering, is there anything we need to change in our protocols and things that we're going to need to do that are going to?
Yes, and we'll look over all of that with our athletic department and.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
And could I just also note that in speaking to Strauss Esme today, they will also be changing some other language in terms of parents and legal guardians and other sort of repetitive language in that in various policies. And the reason behind that is the board, through its bylaw, defines parent to include a number of other categories as well in terms of adoptive, foster, legal guardianship, those sorts of things. So again, you'll see some coming through over the next several months, I suppose, with that adjustment as well.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Mhm. Okay, with that, we will move on to old business. Is there any old business?
Go ahead.
We do have a legislative liaison meeting on Monday. Zoom meeting will be with our assemblywomen and our senator. It was shifted to an earlier time, 9:45 a.m. So you have until midnight to give me any additional questions that you may have.
Thank you. Anyone else? Stan?
More question for Mr. McCarthy.
Okay.
Are we allowed to listen to that?
It's only the committee
Okay.
that attends.
But
Yeah,
you're gonna give us a report.
but I will give a report back. That is correct.
Perfect, thank you.
Full, thorough minutes.
I trust your report.
Yes.
That's a board committee. That's a board committee, so you're good. Okay, anyone else? Okay, you don't see anybody's hand raised in the Okay, we will move on to new business. Is there any new business? Ms. Gilman?
Well, this evening I had the the honor of attending the 8th grade dialogue sponsored by the Monmouth County School Boards Association, and gave the greeting for everyone there, and was very proud to have one of our Ocean Township students qualify for the dialogue. And the students were asked questions about their school district, what they found to be successful. One of the most interesting questions I thought was, if you were principal for the day, what would you do? And one of the respondents said, I would go to the teachers and ask them what they want to make them happy. I said, wow, that's pretty open. That's pretty. Okay. The list would be there. But it was an honor, and the students and their parents and their families were there in attendance, and it was facilitated by Dr. Paul Christopher from Shore Regional, and everybody was discussing the same thing: funding, loss of funding, budgetary concerns. But it was all about the students for that night, and much like the Hall of Fame, it was a proud moment again for Ocean Township.
Thank you for representing us.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Any other new business? All right. Right now, I'd like to open it up for public comment on any item. Anyone in the room have any public comment on any item? No? Okay. Ms. Conway, is there anyone in the queue?
Sorry. Yes, Madam President. Rita Condolian.
Thank you.
Ms. Condolian, Madam Condolian, please go ahead.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Hi, Rita Condolian, Township of Ocean teacher. And I'm just wanted to say that I noticed that you were commenting on all the field trips that you were approving, and I thank you for approving them. And I just attended as a chaperone a field trip with the 8th grade G&Ters to the Bueller Challenger Space Center, and it was an amazing experience. But I'm sad to say, I believe based on budget cuts that will be happening next year or in future years. So I didn't know if the Board of Ed is willing to consider having parents pay for field trips like that, or fundraising that can be done. But it was such an amazing experience. I would hate to see that future G&T students could not participate in that.
Thank you very much for your comment. Ms. Conway, anyone else in the queue?
Yes, Madam President. Alex Hayes.
Okay. Go on, Ms. Hayes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
It never says that it says that you're unmuted very loud. So sorry about that. I just had a comment for one thing Mr. Schneider was talking about. Comparing us to Newark is a little bit apples to oranges. I know you see Newark's $100 million and our pithy $17,000. But just for point of reference, last year alone, Newark saw 1,000 more students added to their district roster. So, we're losing students according to the state. So that explains a little bit of that. I'm not so sure what else I can think about that comment relating us to Newark. The 2.86 that you guys are basically signing off on as a tax increase as the best way to go from Ms. Weldon. I appreciate that you didn't keep it at 2.0 because then of course that would mean more cuts. But last week, Ms. Weldon did say that if you guys didn't proceed with everything that was on the table, which could have gone as high as 3.46, that things would unfortunately have to be cut. But you guys couldn't say exactly what it is just yet. And it all depends on, many times retirements, and in the spring and the summer, how many retirements we get. And then if the district will decide not to fill those retirements to save money, but that will raise class sizes. So I do hope there will be more transparency down the line with what possibly is not going to happen, because we are doing 2.86 and not a little bit higher that the superintendent had initially proposed. And thank you, Mr. Hastings, for explaining the difference between the legal guardian and then the parent and student, because at first seeing Strauss Esme nixing the legal guardian part, got my ears all twitched a little bit because I thought we were kind of disregarding that whole class of parents to many students. So thank you for explaining that our board policies already kind of address that. I think that's it, except my last comment will be, we had some amazing things going on at Read Across America at every school. And we had the 2 college football teams. It would be nice one year in the future, if school board members would actually be invited into the schools. And if you all could read to the students, that would be awesome. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments, Mrs. Hayes. Is there anyone else, Ms. Conway?
No, Madam President, there are no further commenters.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I'd like to ask the board for a motion to adjourn.
So,
May I please have a second? Mr. Dalton, thank you. Have a great evening, everyone.